What happens when the nation with the absolute strongest, most ironclad legal right to American weapons is the exact same nation that gets told they can't have them? I
Right.
mean, imagine you are managing a crisis, right?
Yeah.
And you have a $14 billion shipment of defense hardware, and it's just packed up and ready.
Completely approved.
Exactly. The law, the actual binding statute that Congress wrote, says that shipment must be judged solely on the needs of the recipient.
Solely. That's the key word.
Right. It cannot be delayed just because someone else in the world might want it. Yet the shipment is frozen.
Yeah.
And when you ask the government why, you don't just get an evasion. You get three completely different mutually exclusive answers from the absolute top levels of the U.S. national security apparatus.
Yeah.
And this all happens in the span of just over 2 weeks.
Which is, it's unprecedented.
It is. So today we're taking a deep dive into this massive ghost shipment to Taiwan in the spring of 2026 and what it reveals about this terrifying, totally ungoverned void at the very heart of the U.S. military.
And it is a void. It's a void that the defense establishment has managed to keep incredibly quiet for a long time.
Yeah.
Primarily because, well, the system functioned flawlessly for decades, right? But the global events of early 2026 they ripped the facade completely off this architecture.
That really good.
The sequence of events you're referring to, it is arguably the most clinically revealing moment in modern defense policy.
Absolutely.
We have to look at the timeline because these contradictions aren't just political noise. They are verified empirical facts. They're evidence of a systemic collapse.
Yeah. Let's lay out that timeline for the listener just so you can see exactly how bizarre this gets. We are starting with a very specific sequence of 16 days in May 2026.
Right.
And the question on the table is really straightforward. Why is Taiwan's $14 billion package of congressionally approved Patriot ammunition and air defense systems being withheld?
Right. Simple question.
You would think so.
Yeah.
So day one of our timeline is May 15th. President Trump goes on Fox News. He's asked about the hold, and he explicitly describes the Taiwan package as a, quote, negotiating chip.
Yeah.
He frames it entirely as diplomatic leverage against China.
Which, that is a classic geopolitical rationale, right? You hold the asset to force a behavior.
Sure.
But then you fast forward just 6 days, May 21st.
Right.
We have Acting Navy Secretary Hung Kao sitting before a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee.
Under oath?
Under oath, yes, in a formal legislative setting. And he offers a rationale that just completely ignores the president's claim.
Completely.
He testifies that the Taiwan sale is on hold because those specific munitions need to be conserved for the ongoing military campaign against Iran.
Wow.
Right. He defines it strictly as a matter of material conservation. He's saying, look, there is a finite amount of ammunition and it is actively being routed to a shooting war.
So we have diplomatic leverage on May 15th and then a critical ammunition shortage on May 21st, which brings us to May 30th. Defense Secretary Hegseth is standing at the podium at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore.
Which is arguably the premier defense summit in the Indo-Pacific.
Right. So he's asked to clarify the U.S. position. He stands up and directly contradicts his own acting Navy secretary.
Yeah.
He just flatly declines to link the Taiwan hold to the Iran campaign. In fact, he expresses absolute confidence in future production rates, which effectively denies that a structural shortage even exists.
Right.
And he concludes by saying the ultimate choice simply rests with the president.
So if you're keeping track, in just 16 days, the highest echelons of the executive branch give us 3 entirely incompatible realities for a single $14 billion withheld transaction.
3 realities.
Reality 1, it's a tool of leverage. Reality 2, we are facing a critical, dangerous shortage. Reality 3, there's an abundance, we'll produce our way out of it, and it's just, presidential discretion.
Now, if you are listening to this, the very natural, very tempting response is to roll your eyes and say, well, it's just Washington, right? It's a catastrophic failure of message discipline. The communications team failed, the talking points weren't distributed, and nobody is on the same page.
That's the easy answer.
It is, but I want to push back on that reading aggressively. As an analytical skeptic, I look at that timeline and I see something much, much more profound.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how institutions actually work. Message in discipline implies that a settled internal policy actually exists somewhere, and 3 different officials just fumbled the delivery.
Right.
But if they had a rule, they would all be pointing to it, even clumsily. What we're going to establish for you in this deep dive is that they applied 3 different implicit criteria on the fly because no explicit criterion actually exists.
And that is the crucial institutional diagnosis.
Oh, yeah.
When we strip away all the political theater and just look at the verified empirical facts, we are not looking at a public relations crisis.
Okay.
We are looking at the symptom of a missing rule. We're looking at a structural void in how the world's most critical defense architecture currently operates.
Exactly.
Today, we are going to introduce a concept that we refer to as the discretionary reserve.
The discretionary reserve.
Yes. We define the discretionary reserve as the finite physical inventory of highly scarce interceptors, specifically systems like THAAD and Patriot, and they are distributed entirely case by case by the executive branch.
Right, case by case.
Exactly, because there is absolutely no legal instrument in existence that ranks the concurrent, legally grounded claims upon them.
So, you are joining us today to conduct a sober, clinical post-mortem of a system that has slipped into a really dangerous, ungoverned void.
Yeah.
The discretionary reserve worked beautifully in an era where we had more missiles than emergencies, right?
When there was abundance.
But scarcity has transformed this system into a mechanism of totally arbitrary, undisclosed choice. And to understand the sheer gravity of this, we can't just parse political statements. We have to look at the industrial reality.
Where?
We have to look at the math of what just happened in the Middle East. Let's talk about the Iran campaign of early 2026.
Well, to understand the legal crisis, you really have to understand the material constraints. The industrial facts from the Iran campaign are just staggering.
They really are.
And they completely reframe this old concept of American military abundance. If we look at the joint ledger, this was compiled by the Royal United Services Institute and the Payne Institute Coalition Forces, expended 11,194 munitions in just the first 16 days of the 39-day campaign.
I mean, I want you to stop and visualize that for a second. Over 11,000 high-end munitions dropped or fired in just over 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That is a burn rate that just completely defies conventional logistical planning.
It breaks the models.
It does. The financial cost alone is astronomical. It's roughly $26 billion in expenditure in 16 days.
Right.
But it's not the sheer volume of all munitions that matters for our diagnosis today.
Yeah.
It is the specific consumption of the high-end interceptors. That is what constitutes the discretionary reserve.
Precisely, because in those initial 16 days, the United States fired 198 THAAD interceptors.
Wait, 198?
Yes, and across the broader coalition effort, 12,285 PAC-3 and 402 PAC-2 Patriot interceptors were expended.
Oh my God.
When you look at the depletion reality, once the act of fighting paused, the numbers present a structural crisis. Now, it is important to note for our listeners that the Pentagon keeps official inventory numbers highly classified.
Naturally.
So we have to rely on independent estimates. And as analysts, we do have to acknowledge that those estimates conflict slightly, which is a verified fact of the public record itself.
Right. Let's lay out the boundaries of that conflict so you, the listener, know the exact margins we're working within. We aren't guessing here. We are looking at the most credible assessments available.
Right. So the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, they produced an estimate suggesting that U.S. forces expended more than half of their entire global SOD inventory.
More than half.
Yeah, and nearly half of their total Patriot stock. Their worst-case scenario actually placed the THAAD expenditure near a catastrophic 80% depletion.
80%. That is, I mean, that's almost empty.
Exactly. However, the Payne Institute released an independent mid-campaign estimate that was a bit more conservative, placing the THAAD draw closer to 40%.
Okay, so the honest, empirically defensible range that the U.S. government is waking up to is that somewhere between 40 and 80% of the global THAAD inventory was consumed,
Yes.
alongside roughly half of the entire Patriot stock. And I want to pause here just to clear up a persistent myth that you might have seen circulating in defense blogs or news chyrons.
Oh, the 46% number.
Yes. You'll sometimes hear a figure of 46% depletion thrown around specifically regarding Patriots.
Right.
That exact 46% number actually applies to the expenditure of ATACMS and precision strike missiles, not Patriots.
That's a crucial distinction.
It is. However, the CSIS estimate for Patriot depletion happens to sit very close to that anyway, right around 45%. So the underlying takeaway is identical. A massive civilization-defending fraction of the 2 scarcest interceptor types on Earth was burned through in under 6 weeks of combat.
Which forces us to look at the multi-year refill horizon.
Right.
The immediate institutional assumption, the reflex of almost every politician in Washington, is that this is simply a funding problem.
Just write a check.
Right. The logic goes, Congress just needs to appropriate more money, pass a supplemental spending bill, write a bigger check to the defense contractors, and the stockpile just fills back up.
Yeah.
But money does not bend time.
No, it doesn't.
The binding constraint on the discretionary reserve is not appropriation, it is industrial time.
I think this is where the disconnect between the public and the Pentagon really lies. You know, we're so used to the idea of the American industrial juggernaut.
The arsenal of democracy.
Right, the arsenal of democracy that built Liberty ships in days during World War II.
Yeah.
But you can't just flip a switch and print a Patriot missile.
Absolutely not.
Before we go further, for the listener who pictures a missile just as a flying tube of explosives that blows up near an enemy plane to take it down with shrapnel, explain the technology we're actually talking about here. What is a PAX-3 MSE?
That is a really critical distinction. The older interceptors, like the PASI-2, worked exactly as you just described.
Okay.
They fly near the incoming threat and detonate a fragmentation warhead, basically hoping the shrapnel destroys the target.
Like a shotgun blast.
Exactly. But the PAX-3 MSE, which stands for Missile Segment Enhancement, and it's the current crown jewel of the Patriot system, and the PAD interceptor, these are what we call hit-to-kill weapons.
Hit-to-kill.
Right. They do not rely on an explosive blast. They literally collide with the incoming ballistic missile in the atmosphere or just outside it.
Wow.
The sheer kinetic energy of the impact pulverizes the threat.
So if the incoming missile is a bullet traveling at Mach 5, the PAC-3 is another bullet, also traveling at Mach 5, and the computer has to calculate a flight path to make those two bullets hit each other perfectly head-on in the sky.
Precisely.
The level of precision required is microscopic. It is physics at the absolute edge of human capability.
It is.
And that explains why the production schedule is so agonizingly slow.
Let's look at the timeline for THAAD. What does the industrial reality actually look like?
Consider this. No new THAAD interceptor have been delivered to the U.S. inventory since July 2023.
July 2023.
Right. And the next expected shipment isn't slated until around April 2027.
Wait, almost 4 years.
Yes. And if you push the manufacturing base to absolute maximum surge production rates, they can build roughly 96 THAAD interceptors a year.
Hold on, let me just hold on that math for a second, because the structural contradiction here is breathtaking.
Yeah, do the math.
We just established from the verified ledger that the U.S. fired 198 THAAD interceptors in the first 16 days of the Iran war.
Surge production, assuming everything goes perfectly, is 96 a year.
Mm-hmm.
So the United States fought a war that consumed over 2 full years of maximum industrial output in roughly 2 weeks.
That is the exact mathematical reality.
It's insane.
Reconstituting these stocks to pre-war levels is a project measured in 3, 4, perhaps 5 years, minimum.
Wow.
And that timeline generously assumes that final assembly, bolting the missile together in a giant factory, is the only hurdle.
Which it isn't.
It is not. The true bottleneck, the reason that throwing a $50 billion check at Lockheed Martin doesn't instantly solve this crisis, sits one tier below the prime contractor.
The sub-tier bottleneck. This is where the illusion of capacity really falls apart.
Yes. Final assembly capacity at a massive Lockheed plant is effectively irrelevant if the highly specialized internal components aren't there to be assembled.
Right.
For the PASI-3 MSE, the most vital component is the active radar seeker.
Okay, what does that do?
Unlike older missiles that rely on a radar dish on the ground to guide them, the PASI-3 has its own miniaturized radar system built right into the nose of the missile.
Ah, so it drives itself.
It finds the target itself in the final seconds of flight. Producing that seeker is a masterclass in advanced manufacturing. And here's the catch. Every single active radar seeker for the PASI-3 MSE is produced at one facility.
One facility in the world.
A single Boeing plant in Huntsville, Alabama.
You're kidding.
In 2025, that single facility delivered only around 650 to 700 seekers for the entire year.
I want to make sure the listener really absorbs this, so let's use an analogy. It is like Ford announcing they are building a massive new auto plant in Texas that can roll out 10,000 cars a day.
Right.
The politicians celebrate, the stock price goes up, the factory is huge, but those cars are completely useless.
No.
Because there's only one guy in a small shed in Alabama who possesses the technology to make the steering wheels.
Exactly.
And he can only make 2 steering wheels a day.
That's a perfect analogy.
The final assembly line is an illusion of capacity. Even if Lockheed builds a factory the size of Rhode Island, they can only finish as many missiles as Boeing can supply active radar seekers for from that one building in Huntsville.
Which isn't many.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, playing the skeptic here, I have to point to the headlines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in January and February of 2026, we saw these massive, highly publicized announcements from the defense industry.
The frameworks.
Yeah, Lockheed signed a framework agreement to quadruple BAFAR output from 96 up to 400 a year, and another framework to triple PAC-3 MSE output toward 2,000 a year by 2030. Doesn't that indicate the industrial base is finally scaling to meet the crisis?
It indicates a corporate intention to scale, but we have to be clinical about the legal nature of these agreements.
Okay.
A framework is not a binding contract.
It's PR.
It's a highly publicized handshake. Many of those agreements remain entirely contingent on future congressional appropriations. The manufacturers, Boeing, Lockheed, RTX, they are rational actors. They will not lay down hundreds of millions of dollars in capital to build new seeker facilities or expand assembly lines until the government legally commits the funds through a contracted order.
Right, they aren't charities.
Exactly. As of the verifiable sources we are working from, only one of those frameworks has actually been converted into a binding legal instrument.
Which one?
The $35.3 billion THEG contract awarded by the Missile Defense Agency on June 24, 2026.
Okay.
The rest are, for now, just pieces of paper outlining a desired future.
So the material reality we are left with is a structural, durable scarcity.
Absolutely.
The discretionary reserve is half empty, it takes years to refill, and the supply chain is completely choked at the sub-tier level in Alabama.
Right.
Which forces us to ask the single most important institutional question of this entire deep dive. As this finite, irreplaceable stock depletes, how does the United States government legally decide who gets the remaining inventory?
That is the core question.
I mean, imagine you are the president, and you have 10 missiles left.
Sure.
Taiwan wants them, Israel wants them, Ukraine wants them. Who gets them?
This is where we have to examine the legal architecture, and what we find is deeply unsettling.
Walk us through it.
The allocation of these interceptors is governed by three distinct legal channels that, remarkably, do not speak to one another.
Wait, they don't coordinate.
There is no master switchboard.
Yeah.
And what we find when we map these three channels is a precise structural paradox.
Okay.
The legal strength of a nation's claim runs perfectly opposite to its actual material satisfaction.
Say that again.
The stronger your legal right to the weapon, the less likely you are to actually get it.
That is, wow. Let's break those channels down for the listener, starting with the strongest claim on the board. The one that should, in theory, guarantee delivery.
Channel 1 is Taiwan.
Okay.
Taiwan's claim rests on a unique piece of legislation called the Taiwan Relations Act, specifically Section 3B.
The two.
Right. This statute establishes what lawyers call a statutory floor. It directs that the United States shall make available defense articles necessary for Taiwan to maintain a sufficient self-defense capability.
Shall, not may.
Exactly. It's a mandate. But, crucially, the law explicitly forbids comparative analysis. The statute instructs the executive branch that Taiwan's defense needs must be judged, quote, solely upon Taiwan's needs.
Let me unpack that word solely, because it is the absolute linchpin of the whole argument here.
It really is.
You cannot legally sit in the Oval Office and say, well, I look at the globe, and Taiwan needs these Patriot systems to deter China, but Israel's fighting a war right now, so Israel needs them more.
You can't say that.
The Taiwan Relations Act forbids that exact calculation. You are legally required to look only at Taiwan in a vacuum.
Yes.
Yet, as we established in our opening timeline, Taiwan's $14 billion fully funded package is the one being withheld and used as a negotiating chip.
Right.
The claimant with the strongest possible legal footing, a statutory floor that bans comparison, is denied delivery.
Which brings us to Channel 2. Israel and the Gulf states. Their claim to American weapons runs through a completely different piece of legislation, the Arms Export Control Act, or AECA.
Right.
Specifically, they rely on the Section 36 emergency waiver provision.
And how strong is that?
From a strict legal standpoint, this is the weakest claim on the board.
Really?
It is purely discretionary. It rests entirely on the executive branch making a spontaneous finding that an emergency exists.
Just waking up and deciding there's an emergency.
Basically, yes. And that finding allows them to bypass ordinary congressional review periods and expedite the shipment.
And between March and May of 2026, as the Iran campaign was raging, that Section 36 waiver was exercised 4 separate times for Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Kuwait.
4 times.
Now, here is the contradiction that should make any institutional analyst pull their hair out. 4 independent emergencies declared singly do not legally constitute a queue.
No, they don't.
There is no overarching master statute that says Middle Eastern emergency waivers rank higher than Pacific defense statutory floors.
None.
Yet, this weakest, purely discretionary claim is the one that gets exercised repeatedly. The Gulf gets the missiles, Taiwan gets the hold.
Exactly. And then we introduce the third channel, which complicates the entire picture even further.
Oh, great, a third channel.
This is Ukraine's mechanism, known as the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, or PRL.
PRL, okay.
PRL was established in 2025. It is an Allied-funded, NATO-coordinated mechanism. Under PRL, European allies and Canada pool their sovereign capital to fund the purchase of U.S.-made defense systems for Ukraine.
But, and this is the critical foundational detail that I want you, the listener, to grasp, they're drawing from the exact same U.S. stockpiles.
The exact same ones.
It is not like NATO built a separate Patriot factory in Brussels just for Ukraine. It is the same discretionary reserve.
Right.
Think of it like a bank. Taiwan has a massive, legally guaranteed account. The Gulf states keep running in with emergency withdrawal slips, and NATO is wiring money in on behalf of Ukraine. But there is only one vault in the back, and it's half empty.
Exactly. A URL operates with absolutely no statutory floor of its own in U.S. law, and it doesn't utilize an independent executive emergency finding like the AECA waiver.
So what is it?
It is essentially an outsourced funding mechanism. Yet by June 2026, PRL had committed over $6 billion, and Ukraine is actively being supplied from the U.S. stockpile, while Washington simultaneously delays contracted interceptor deliveries to other longstanding European and Asian customers just to manage the shortfall.
So let's crystallize this legal inversion, because it is the core failure of the system.
Let's hear it.
We have 3 claims on one finite depleting stock of missiles.
Right.
The claimant with a statutory floor that explicitly forbids comparison Taiwan is withheld.
Yes.
The claimants with nothing but renewable discretionary emergency waivers, Israel and the Gulf, are repeatedly supplied. And the claimant, funded by outside allies, with absolutely no statutory floor in U.S. law, Ukraine gets deliveries, while fully contracted customers are told to get to the back of the line.
It's inverted.
Legal strength runs in the exact opposite direction of material satisfaction.
Now, one might assume there has to be an overarching rule guiding this chaos, right?
I would hope.
Surely the White House has a policy document that ranks these priorities. People often point to Executive Order 14383, the America First Arms Transfer Strategy, issued in February 2026, assuming it provides the missing ranking rule.
Right. I've read that order. Its stated goal is to prioritize arms transfers based on strategic importance and defense spending. Doesn't that solve our problem? Doesn't that rank the claims?
It does not, for 2 distinct and fatal reasons.
Okay, what's the first?
First, the criteria outlined in the executive order are disjunctive.
Disjunctive.
Yes. It says the United States will prioritize transfers to partners who have invested in their own self-defense, or partners who have a critical role or geography, or are partners who contribute to U.S. economic security.
Let me stop you there, because the word OR is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
A ton of heavy lifting.
If the test is self-defense investment, critical geography, or economic contribution, literally everyone passes that test.
Everyone.
Taiwan has critical geography. Israel invests heavily in self-defense. Ukraine has a critical role in European stability. The Gulf states contribute massively to global economic security via energy markets.
Right.
If everyone is a priority, no one is a priority.
Precisely. The language of the order admits every claimant through the front door.
Yeah.
Second, the executive order is fundamentally a sales promotion instrument designed to boost the U.S. industrial base. It is meant to streamline bureaucracy for exports.
It's for selling things faster.
Exactly. It is not a rationing mechanism for a finite, depleting stock in a time of severe scarcity. It tells the bureaucracy what to accelerate in peacetime. It offers zero guidance on how to allocate a shortfall in wartime.
That makes sense.
And empirically, we know it doesn't function as a rule because it was entirely overridden in Taiwan's case.
Right.
Taiwan clearly meets the critical geography criterion of the order, yet its package was withheld as a negotiating chip, a rationale that exists absolutely nowhere in the text of Executive Order 14383.
So we have 3 statutory channels that are entirely silent on how they relate to one another, and an executive order that claims to prioritize, but actually just hands out participation trophies to everyone.
Pretty much.
This brings us to a really uncomfortable realization. If you were listening to this, you might think, man, Congress really screwed up when they wrote these laws. What a terrible loophole.
But it's not a loophole.
Right. The lack of a ranking rule isn't a typo. It isn't a drafting error by some sleep-deprived junior staffer in a legislative committee at 3 in the morning. This architecture of silence is entirely intentional.
It is a deliberate design of executive delegation. As analysts, we must infer that Congress deliberately omitted a rigid legislative priority rule.
They chose not to write one.
Yes, they specifically chose not to write a law that says Taiwan always comes before Ukraine and Ukraine always comes before the Gulf, to prevent binding the executive's conduct of foreign policy to an unforeseeable schedule.
Which makes logical sense on paper.
Exactly, because you cannot predict the exact shape, location, or severity of the next global crisis. So logically, you leave the executive branch with the latitude to decide in the moment.
And I want to be very clear here. The delegation of power was logically sound when it was written. It makes sense not to tie the president's hands.
Of course.
But it carried an enormous unstated precondition, a silent assumption that made the whole system work. And that precondition was abundance.
Precisely. When the discretionary reserve was deep, when we had thousands of interceptors sitting in warehouses, this system worked flawlessly.
Because everyone could get what they wanted.
Right. Discretion was a costless administrative convenience. If the U.S. approved an emergency waiver to send Patriot missiles to Israel, the stock was deep enough that it didn't measurably subtract from Taiwan's eventual delivery.
The choice was easy.
The president didn't have to confront the allocation as a brutal choice among rivals, because the claims weren't actually rivalrous yet. There was enough to go around.
But scarcity converts that administrative convenience into a structural contradiction.
It breaks the system.
Because the reserve is now half spent, and we've established it will take years to refill, every single claim is a zero-sum subtraction from every other claim.
Mathematically.
If Israel gets a missile today, Taiwan mathematically cannot have that missile tomorrow. The very latitude that was designed to allow the U.S. to move quickly and decisively has mutated into a mechanism for ranking sovereign, legally binding claims with no explicit rule, no public record, and absolutely zero accountability.
And we can prove that this failure mode isn't just a theoretical future scenario cooked up in a think tank.
No, it's happening.
It is the present unmanaged reality. We have empirical evidence from March 2026 that shows the system fracturing under the pressure of scarcity.
What happened in March?
In March, the United States military actually physically moved Hagyud components out of South Korea, relocating them to the Middle East to replenish interceptors expended during the early stages of the Iran conflict.
Think about the strategic implications of that. They literally robbed Pacific deterrence-taking systems meant to defend against North Korea and China to feed the Gulf fight.
Yes.
And they did it entirely by undisclosed executive discretion. There was no congressional debate. There was no public ranking of priorities. It just happened.
And the diversion didn't stop at physical assets. Furthermore, in late March, the Pentagon notified Congress of plans to redirect roughly $750 million of those NATO-contributed PURAL funds we discussed earlier.
Wait, the money European allies gave for Ukraine?
Exactly. Remember, this is money that European allies had put into specific Ukraine-designated accounts. The Pentagon diverted that $750 million toward replenishing U.S. stockpiles amid the Middle East drawdown.
That's unbelievable.
Reports at the time indicated that U.S. officials weren't even sure if the European contributors fully understood that their funds could legally be used that way.
It is breathtaking.
Yeah.
Under sufficient scarcity, undisclosed discretion doesn't just shuffle American assets around the board. It reaches into other nations' sovereign capital and reallocates it without warning.
It really does.
Which naturally leads to the next phase of this crisis. As the stockpile depletes and the zero-sum reality sets in, the U.S. government desperately attempts to enlarge the pie, right?
Yeah, they have to.
They try to find ways to produce more interceptors outside of the constrained U.S. industrial base. And the way they go about this exposes a whole new layer of ungoverned, legally dubious behavior.
Yes, the production frontier.
Let's look at the production frontier, specifically the bizarre events of July 2026.
So, at the NATO summit in Ankara on July 8th, President Trump made a highly publicized, dramatic pledge. Standing on the global stage, he offered to give Ukraine the right to license and manufacture Patriot interceptors themselves.
Okay, so on its face, this sounds like a bold solution to the scarcity problem. If we can't build them fast enough, let Ukraine build them.
Right.
And as the analytical skeptic here, I have to point out the president's own framing of this offer because he said the quiet part out loud.
He really did.
I am going to read a direct quote from his remarks in Ankara. Quote, "We're going to give a license to you to make Patriots. That's pretty cool.
Right.
This way you can't complain that we're not giving them enough."
It is a stunning admission of intent. The offer to license production was fundamentally a grievance management tool.
He just wanted them to stop complaining.
Exactly. It was a political gesture intended to quiet Allied complaints about the supply shortage, rather than a viable material remedy to the scarcity itself.
And we know it's an industrial illusion because of what is actually capable of being built in Europe versus what they desperately need.
Exactly.
Can you dissect for the listener why offering Ukraine a license doesn't actually solve the problem on the ground?
Well, licensed final assembly of Patriot systems by foreign partners already happens. It is a standard procedure governed by Section 3060 of the Arms Export Control Act.
Okay.
Japan has assembled Patriots domestically for decades. Currently, Germany has a joint venture called Comlog, which is standing up a production line right now.
So they are building them in Europe.
But here is the massive caveat. Germany's Comlog line builds the older PAX-2 GMT variant, the one that relies on a fragmentation blast. They're only projected to produce about 180 of these older missiles a year, and they won't even deliver the first one before 2027.
But the real scarcity, the weapon everyone actually needs to survive a modern ballistic missile barrage, is the PAX-3 MSE.
The hit-to-kill missile.
Exactly.
Correct. The PAC-3 MSE is the crown jewel of American air defense technology, and negotiations to license its production in Europe have completely failed. The technology is simply too sensitive, and the supply chain is too complex. But even if those negotiations hadn't failed, even if the U.S. handed Ukraine the blueprints tomorrow, licensing assembly in Ukraine or Europe does absolutely nothing to bypass the sub-tier bottleneck we discussed earlier.
The Boeing facility in Huntsville.
Yes.
The guy in the shed making the steering wheels.
Exactly. You can authorize a partner to bolt the missile fuselage together in Kyiv or Berlin, but if they are still waiting in line for the active radar seeker to be shipped from Alabama, you haven't created new supply.
You're still stuck.
You haven't expanded the stockpile. You've just relocated the waiting room. The bottleneck remains identical.
But let's look at the legality of this offer, because this is where the institutional norms completely break down.
Oh, this is the wildest part.
The president offered to license Lockheed Martin's proprietary technology, their most guarded, advanced intellectual property, to Ukraine without actually informing Lockheed Martin first.
Yeah.
He admitted this to the press pool right after the speech, saying casually, "We haven't informed the company of that yet."
Just threw it out there.
If you are a lawyer listening to this, your jaw just hit the floor. How does a government legally compel a private, publicly traded corporation to hand over its most valuable intellectual property to a foreign nation in the middle of a war zone on a whim?
Through ordinary statutory tools, it doesn't.
He can't.
Right. There is no law that says the president can simply give away a private company's IP. But what we are observing here is not governed by statute. It is governed by monopsony power.
Monopsony. Explain that concept. We know monopoly is a single seller. What is monopsony?
Monopsony means there is a single buyer in a market. The Pentagon is effectively the sole purchaser for these advanced defense systems.
So the government is the only customer.
Exactly. If the U.S. government doesn't buy the PAC-3, no one buys the PAC-3 because export controls prevent Lockheed from selling it to anyone else without government permission. So the government holds all the leverage. When a senior legislator was asked by the press if Lockheed would fight the president's demand to license the tech to Ukraine, the legislator's answer was chillingly simple. They said it was in the company's, quote, best interest to comply.
It's pure, unadulterated coercion via market dominance. It's mob logic, right? Nice defense contract you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it.
That's exactly what it is.
The consent is extracted not through law, but because the company relies entirely on the government for its financial survival.
Now, to be fair, there is an actual statutory tool meant for this kind of industrial compulsion in a national emergency. Title I of the Defense Production Act, or DPA.
The DPA, right.
The DPA allows the president to prioritize government contracts and allocate materials. But using the DPA to compel a firm to license crown jewel intellectual property to a novel foreign actor is largely untested legal ground.
It's murky.
And more alarmingly, the authority itself is precariously fragile. Most of the critical DPA provisions lapsed in late 2025 were restored only by short-term legislative stopgaps and are currently set to sunset again on September 30th, 2026.
That's coming up fast.
The government's instrument of last resort for industrial control is operating on a leash that is renewed in increments of months.
So let me summarize this widening series of completely ungoverned questions because the void is just getting bigger and bigger.
Go for it.
First, we don't know who gets the physical stock because there's no ranking rule and the laws conflict.
Sure.
Second, we don't know how the state can legally compel production on its own terms, relying instead on backroom monopsony pressure because the actual laws are expiring.
Sure.
Third, we don't know who gets the right to be licensed to build these weapons. And the bizarre inversion we saw in the delivery of the missiles reappears in the production of them.
Yes, it mirrors it perfectly.
Think about it. Ukraine, the claimant with no statutory floor, is offered the right to manufacture the highly scarce PAS-3, while Taiwan, the claimant with a statutory floor that forbids comparison, is denied delivery of the finished product. The system is entirely upside down.
Which brings us to the ultimate, inescapable consequence of the discretionary reserve.
The fallout.
When you manage a critical security architecture through undisclosed, unpredictable discretion, you send a very clear message to your allies.
And what's that message?
And claimants who cannot rely on being ranked favorably in a crisis will eventually stop playing the game. They will seek an exit.
Put yourself in the shoes of a European defense minister.
Right.
You have watched the U.S. hold Taiwan's missiles as a negotiating chip.
Yeah.
You have watched the U.S. pull Stata out of South Korea. You have watched the U.S. divert NATO money to replenish its own stocks.
You're terrified.
You are realizing that an American contract is not a guarantee. It's a lottery ticket subject to the president's mood. We are already seeing the breakdown of the queue. Ukraine realized they couldn't trust the American allocation process, so what do?
They bypassed Washington entirely. Ukraine went to nearly 40 different countries asking them to release interceptors from their own national stocks in a massive informal barter system.
Bartering for missiles.
The pitch was essentially, give us your interceptors now for the current fight, and we'll trade you our future contracted deliveries from the U.S. later.
It is allocation by barter, a flea market for advanced weaponry, necessitated by the total absence of allocation by rule.
It's a good way to put it.
And this barter system is just the first step. The next step is the active Europeanization of supply.
Yes.
The Ukrainian defense press has explicitly cited the logic behind relying on the German Comlog line. They aren't investing in German production just because it's closer geographically.
No, the stated goal is specifically to bypass American bureaucracy and logistics. They are actively seeking to remove Washington's discretion from their defense equation.
And the most profound shift goes beyond just finding new suppliers or bartering existing stocks. Allies are now building sovereign substitutes.
Sovereign substitutes.
They are creating systems designed from the ground up to not rely on American components. Give us an example of that. What does a sovereign substitute look like in practice?
A prime example is the Freywire, or FP7 program.
The FE7.
This is an open architecture air defense system. Open architecture means it isn't locked into one manufacturer's proprietary ecosystem.
So they aren't tied to Lockheed or Boeing.
Exactly. The Freywire system stitches together European radars with a domestically produced interceptor. The explicit stated goal of this program is to end their dependence on American allocation decisions.
They saw the bottleneck.
They have realized that the American interceptor is a bottleneck they cannot control, so they are engineering the U.S. entirely out of their defense strategy.
This is the ultimate institutional failure. It is the strategic contradiction at the dead center of all this.
It really is.
Think back to Executive Order 143A3. The entire stated purpose of the America First Arms Transfer Strategy was to use foreign capital to enlarge the domestic U.S. defense industrial base, right?
Right, sell American weapons to allies so they pay for our factories.
But because the executive branch insists on rationing this finite reserve through undisclosed, unpredictable discretion, they are teaching their closest partners that American supply lines are a vulnerability.
A massive vulnerability.
They are training their allies to route their capital around the American industrial base. The United States is destroying the very leverage its discretion was meant to preserve.
So we have mapped the crisis from the symptoms to the underlying disease.
We have.
The architecture cannot make the one decision it most needs to make in an era of scarcity. A lawful, predictable ranking of concurrent, legally grounded claims on one depleting stock.
So how do we fix it?
The question now is, how could this be resolved? Analytically, there are 4 institutional instruments available to the U.S. government, though as analysts, we will not endorse any single one, as each carries profound costs.
Let's walk through them clinically so the listener can see exactly what the options are on the table.
Okay.
Instrument 1, A permanent statutory priority rule. Congress just writes a law that ranks the claims once and for all. Taiwan is always first, Israel is always second, NATO is always third. Problem solved, right?
Well, the cost of that approach is massive rigidity.
No.
You bind the conduct of foreign policy to a strict legislative schedule that future crises will almost certainly need to override.
Right.
The rank that is easiest to legislate in peacetime is exactly the one a real emergency might require you to ignore. You don't want a law forcing you to send missiles to a peaceful Pacific while a war breaks out in Europe simply because the spreadsheet says so.
Okay, so a permanent law is too rigid.
Too rigid.
Instrument 2, temporary statutory allocation. Instead of a permanent rank, Congress fixes bounded shares year by year. In the annual defense bill, they say X amount for the Pacific, Y amount for Europe, Z amount for the Middle East.
This simply compresses the rigidity into a one-year time frame. You are choosing a distribution before you know where the year's emergencies will actually occur. Furthermore, it relies on a historically gridlocked Congress to act preemptively and efficiently.
Good luck with that.
Look at the Ukraine Support Act of June 2026. It only passed the House via a slow, highly contested discharge petition over leadership objections and faced a threatened presidential veto. Relying on the U.S. Congress for dynamic, real-time allocation of scarce weapons during a fast-moving war is a perilous strategy.
Fair point. Congress is too slow.
Yeah.
That brings us to Instrument 3, an executive internal allocation doctrine. The executive branch imposes a standing method upon itself. The White House publishes a clear internal rulebook for ranking claims, maintaining flexibility because they can rewrite it, but creating predictability for allies.
The fatal flaw here is enforceability. A self-imposed doctrine only binds as long as the executive chooses to be bound by it. Executive Order 14383 proves this perfectly. The moment it was politically convenient to withhold Taiwan's package as a negotiating chip, the stated criteria of the order were simply ignored.
You can't trust it.
You cannot build ally trust on a rule the president can delete with a pen stroke.
Which leaves us with Instrument 4, the status quo.
Allocation by undisclosed discretion. The choice is made in the shadows, without a rule, without a public record, and without accountability, until the omission can no longer be hidden and ally trust is irreparably eroded.
The interceptors are going to be allocated one way or another. The laws of physics dictate that a missile can only be in one place at one time.
Exactly.
The only question is whether that allocation happens by a transparent rule or by the complete chaotic absence of one, which leaves you with a provocative thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We've talked about the math, the laws, and the factories.
The whole architecture.
But zoom out and think about the geopolitical endgame. As allies internalize the unreliability of the discretionary reserve, and as they successfully build their own sovereign substitutes, their own factories, their own open architecture radars, their own non-American supply chains, what happens to the global influence of the United States?
That's a profound question.
What happens to American power when the U.S. interceptor is no longer the indispensable anchor of global security, but simply a bureaucratic bottleneck that the rest of the world has learned to engineer around?